Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Max. Let's do an end of month wrap up. I made some new buffer reports and let's take a look at the last month and see how we came out. Then I'll declare a fund of the month. All right, so I added some new underlines. Now, these aren't all the underlines, but I think it's a good representative sample. I have GPIX. I don't have Bally, but it trades very similar to it. I have JEPI. I made most of these funds are S&P based, where I was able to have an S&P based one. YieldMax was an example. It's not S&P based, but it's not really NASDAQ based either, but it's its own little index, as is FEPI. But where I had a choice, I chose the S&P based version of the fund. Like on SPY, I chose SPY instead of triple QI. On the Roundhill, I chose XDTE instead of QDT. It really doesn't make much difference. My buffer reports were getting too big. I'm trying to narrow it down to make the data that it outputs more meaningful. But this goes back for a month. Okay, and I split the buffer report into separate parts. This just does the short volatility funds. This just shows you how they did. So this is cumulative return for the month. And that's how all the charts are. So you can see that's the first, second, third, fourth, and then that was the fifth. That was Monday the 5th. So damn, ZIVB was down 22%. Holy cow. And that's only with the market dropping like 10%. So you can imagine if the market would have dropped 30%, this thing would have been down 66%. Given the same particulars, if it would have dropped 30% as fast, which probably isn't realistic. All right. But anyway, you can see how they bounce back, and you can see ZIVB almost got back in the profit and just couldn't quite do it. Meanwhile, SPX is the benchmark. Now, of course, the benchmark wasn't down as much. All of these funds, because of the vol explosion, were down more than the benchmark. However, SVOL recovered and almost caught the benchmark. By the end of the study, which is the end of the month, SVOL is actually up 2.3%. Nice job, SVOL. Benchmark's up 3.9%. It's been a great month to be an index investor because the indexes are on fire. Closed the month on the highs, or not sure the high for the month, but it was definitely the high for the day and the week. And it's probably the high for the month. So it was an interesting month, to say the least. Good month to be investing in the indexes, but the more protection you bought, in other words, the more calls you sold, probably the more you regretted it. Now, speaking of regretted it, I made a chart with everything on it, and it makes it too small. Let's just forget about that one. All right, here's a chart, and I don't know where it's getting this JEPI number. Obviously have a bad number right there. Well, no, not right there. JEPI, it's right there. It's that number. We went from down, half a point and then a few days later up a quarter point. There was no 16 in between. Gosh darn it, this does this sometimes. That's not the right number for JEPI. They don't trade at that number, but that's the number it pulls sometimes. It makes me frustrated when it does that. I just have to look it up and put JEPI's number in manually sometimes. Well, now this is a better chart here. Okay, so this is a chart without the volatility funds on there. So no SVOL, no ZIVB, just the equity funds. Okay, so this is just stocks. All right, and you can see here the stocks. YieldMax was just getting murdered, right? And YieldMax didn't ever even recover. They still never got their head above water. They're the only ones by the end of the month that were still down. Now, we know why. They have crypto exposure, but they're their own little index. I know this isn't all the funds out there. I'm just saying these are the funds that I think are a good representative sample. I can't study all of them. So So out of these funds, obviously, XDTE was the fund of the month. I mean, up 5%. Holy cow. And look how fast it jumped up. It was down here. It was down like a quarter point here and was up 1.5 the next day. That's between the 12th and the 13th. Then there was a huge gap the next day. And you can see whenever it gaps up, it goes straight to the bottom line because these guys trade daily options and they're uncovered at night. If it gaps up a point, the next day in the market, the fund's up a point. The fund gets credit for that point because it captures all of that. All right. It captures all that before it's capped. Now, in a down market, or maybe even not a down market, a market that's up that maybe has a bunch of down gaps. You have a down gap and the opposite thing's going to happen to them. They're going to lock in a lower price and they're going to look worse compared to the other funds. But in any event, this month was the month of XDTE. My goodness. Now, but the honorable mentions are Goldman, GPIX, JEPI, JEPY, and iSpy. So those are the 4 total return. So let's look at those to each other. Well, there's iSpy, and we'll compare iSpy and the Goldman Fund, GPIX. Okay, now look at this. Very similar. Very, very similar. And also look at the dividend. The dividend also very, very similar. Okay. These funds are basically the same fund, as is Bally. That's why I don't include Bally on here. I mean, I could have left Bally, put Bally on here, not put Goldman on here, but I'm just running out of screen real estate. They're all basically the same fund. Bally seems to pay the lowest dividend of the 3, so I'm going with the other 3. I mean, going with the other 2. All right, so there's iSpy, and let's do FEPI. iSpy versus FEPI. Now, you can see here, FEPI was down more. FEPI has virtually no buffer, but it gets a ton of upside. But iSpy, same thing, doesn't have a lot of buffer, but it has more buffer than FEPI did in this last pullback anyway. All right, so now let's look. What was the other combination there? What was our other honorable mention? JEPI. Let's look at JEPI. Let's see how we did, and let's look at the dividend. JEPI, and let's compare it to the winner, XDTE. All right, so JEPI. So, well, the return wasn't as good. It was good. I mean, 3 points is nothing to sneeze at. The return wasn't as good, but it did get a little less downside, which is good. The thing that's shocking, though, is the difference in the dividend. Price is virtually the same. Actually, JEPI's price is a little higher, so it ought to, other things being equal, the dividend ought to be higher if they were equivalent. JEPI's, 29 cents, XDT's $1.80. Now, XDT pays weekly, but this right here is programmed to look at a month. This is from July 30th till the 30th of this month. So I thought that was interesting. So when you consider XDT had better return and it had a lot better yield, especially than JEPI, I forgot to look at the yield difference on FEPI. It's not going to be as drastic. On FEPI, but XDT does yield almost twice as much, and that's impressive. XDT is definitely an impressive fund, and it was definitely the month of XDTE. There is no doubt about it. All right, do you guys like these new buffer reports? I'm still working on them, but here's one with just the funds that aren't the daily funds. The daily option funds are XDTE, JPY, and iSpy. So I left them out. These are the longer term. These are monthly and also weeklies. I slipped YieldMax in there. It's weeklies, but To me, weekly, it might as well be a monthly. Anything longer than a daily might as well be a month to me. Well, it's interesting to look, if you take the dailies out, which was the winner, XDT, to see which was the best alternatives out of these. And it was JEPI and Goldman. But if you take those other ones out, it's easier to see how they're doing. So you can see, if you can see which fund you have. I like YieldMax. There's nothing wrong with YieldMax. YieldMax's underlines had a bad month. Just kind of like you could, I was going to say, almost like you could say GPIX's underlines had a good month, but their underlines are just the whole index. So when you have the whole index, you just get whatever the index gets. But since these guys concentrate, so I made a video on covered call strategies. Strategies can have attributes. They do have attributes. So they can either be, strategy can either be a yield enhancing strategy, or it can be a total return enhancing strategy. All right. Concentrating the portfolio using less than 100 stocks, doing something like Howard does at Curve at KQQQ, where they momentum weight a portfolio, or doing something like they do at FEPI, where they choose 15 stocks out of the NASDAQ, doing something like they do at YieldMax, where they're just running a fund to fund of all the YieldMax funds. Well, anytime you run a concentration is a big return enhancer when it works. In this case, it's detracting from the return, but it can be a return enhancer. In fact, that's what you're going for. When you concentrate the portfolio, you're going for outperforming the average. And the average is whatever the 100 stocks are. If you're talking about the NASDAQ 100, or the 500 stocks are, you're talking about the S&P 500. All right, folks. Well, I appreciate you guys being here tonight. You have a wonderful evening. I'll be back with another video tomorrow. Okay, see you later.